DFS lineups. We're going to focus now on the AFC Championship game side. And look, I already told you all. I previewed it. I teased it. Tommy Garrett's lineup right here with $100 remaining is spicy. So now we're going to bring on Tommy Garrett to be able to bring him on here today to talk about his picks. And ladies and gentlemen, I highly encourage you to listen closely because when I was looking at this lineup, Tommy, I just couldn't help but think like, okay, I'm going to put some money down on this because this right here, when you talk about impact players and guys that are going to absolutely leave their footprint on this game, this is a fantastic lineup, my friends. So let's break it down. How you doing? First off and foremost, great to see you.
Dude, I'm good. It's been a while. It's weird. It's actually like it's snowing for the first time all year, so I'm trying to remember what this looks like this time of year. So it's kind of nice. Like it's football season. The championships are about to come. To the championship weekend's finally on. So it's like it finally feels right around my area, which is kind of a nice thing. So it's a great weekend. I know when we were kind of divvying out the games this week, where BJ kind of took the NFC, I was like, I was more than happy taking the AFC side because I think that's probably gonna be the more exciting game from an offensive standpoint for DFS. I know it's got the highest spread and the highest over in this one. So for me, I'm kind of all in on this one. I really went star heavy. You kind of saw. So, but weirdly enough, we kind of managed to squeeze it in. DraftKings was pretty good to us this postseason, kind of altered the way these guys, they're priced. So we can kind of get a lot of these bigger name guys we probably normally wouldn't be able to fit in here, and it was a regular season game.
So in a DraftKings lineup, what is your salary? What are you granted at first? Because you had $100 left over remaining, which I think for you to be able to maneuver the star power in which you did, which we're going to get to here in a moment, ladies and gentlemen, I think is very incredible.
Yeah, on DraftKings, it's 50,000. Let me just double check. Yeah, it's 50,000. So you kind of get your average is gonna be like around 5,500. So it's you kind of as you fill that out, you kind of see, okay, I've got this little bit left in this. So you got to find where you can try to save a little bit of money. I did it in the flex spot. But if you kind of look at this, I think the heavy hitters are probably going to be able to carry this team enough. You're kind of hoping, okay, if it's going to be a heavy pass game, negative game script for the Bengals, I'm probably going to go all in on some of their pass catchers, and that's kind of way this one kind of shaped out.
Well, let's start things off. Let's take a look at your quarterback here on a DraftKings lineup in DFS format for the AFC Championship game. If you're trying to fill out an AFC Championship lineup, you start off here with no other than Patrick Mahomes, obviously coming in at $7,400. You know, I think that when you look at Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes, I think what we've seen from Patrick Mahomes so far in the NFL playoffs, I think it's easier to go with him than Joe Burrow at this point, just because of the fact that Joe Burrow has taken a lot of sacks. He's taken a lot of hits, despite the fact that he's got weapons. But as Kanata had pointed out earlier, you look at all the weapons that Kansas City has. I mean, anybody can eat at any moment. And the catalyst to be able to do that is Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and you kind of nailed it with, you can go one of two ways. You either go with a Bengals stack and go with the Chiefs stack. It's probably going to be the two most popular things this week, unless you're trying to do like a, Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford. Looking on the AFC side, it kind of makes a lot of sense. I think the Bengals one does make a lot. It's probably going to be one of the more popular ones. My concern, obviously, we saw it last week, it's the offensive line. For as great as Jamar Chase is, without question, there's no denying it was a fantastic pick. But the offensive line is always going to be an issue until they fix it. I was kind of looking into a little bit more. So not just did he have the 9 sacks last week, but if Joe Burrow, if he holds on the ball between less than 3 seconds, he's within plus or minus 1 percentage point of the league average. 3 seconds or more, the pressure rate's 55%, which is almost 16% higher than the league average. And the sack rate is almost 11% higher at 22.5%. So for me, if I'm expecting a little bit of pressure coming towards the Joe Burrow from that Bengals front line, I'm going to fade and go over towards Patrick Mahomes. And I think he just probably has the higher ceiling. A big thing about this, we kind of look back towards the Week 17 game. This is a home game now, so we kind of have to look at how Patrick Mahomes and Kansas City Chiefs play when they're at home. It's incredible because he's been in the league hardly any time, but he already has 8 home playoff games, which is somewhat staggering. In those games, 318 yards is his average with 23 touchdowns and 1 interception.
Wow.
You look at his 2 games so far this season, 782 yards, 8 touchdowns, 1 pick. He's also added in 98 yards rushing and a touchdown so far. After that whole 4-4, the Chiefs are dead. What's going on with this team? They've gone on a 10-1 run since then. We know how good this team can be, even in that kind of down game against the Chiefs, which might end up costing them the number 1 seed if we look back at it. 260 yards, 2 touchdowns. If I'm going for the heavy hitters in this one, I'm going for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think they have the higher upside. So for me, Patrick Mahomes, he's very much worth the uppay in DFS.
Well, as much as it pains me to say here about Kansas City, I think they're going to win. As much as I'd like the Bengals to win, there's a little bit of karma coming Eli Apple's way. Eli Apple wanted to go on Twitter and roast everybody, talk smack about everybody, Sean Payton, the Saints, New Orleans, the fan bases, and just things like that. I think that Patrick Mahomes is probably going to go his way a little bit. He and Cheeto Bay-Awuzie, which, unfortunately for Cheeto, I've been a big fan of him since his time at CU as a buff, but, some of the matchups he's going to draw, I don't think bode well, especially if you can't get a pass rush pressure on Mahomes. He's going to extend plays, which does not bode well here for the Cincinnati Bengals. So I love your pick here of Patrick Mahomes, but let's go to your running back pick here. I mean, obviously a dog here. You got Joe Mixon for the value of $6,800. And when you factor in going against this Chiefs defense, which at the beginning part of the year, they really struggled against the run. They've buckled down. They've gotten better, but it's Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon after contact is incredible. We saw that against the Tennessee Titans last week.
Yeah, the big thing with Joe Mixon, his efficiency kind of lacks sometimes, but the volume is what we've always wanted to see out of him. We know the type of rusher he can be. It's the reason he got that extension with the Bengals. They believe in him. It was health was a big part of it. We want to see that receiving game. But look at this season, averaging 18.8 touches per game. That's including the playoffs, 17 touchdowns in 18 games so far this season. That right there is what we're looking for. Touchdowns are always very hard to predict sometimes, but I'm looking at that volume and I absolutely love that. And like I said, we talk about the receiving upside, 17 catches on 20 targets in his last 3 games. The issue is it's the rushing upside. That's kind of been the only little lackluster part of his game. He hasn't topped 65 yards since week 12. But for me, I'm kind of looking at this more in terms of the receiving ability. They do have Samaje Perine. You also have Chris Evans, but they don't get a lot of work in this game. It's not like they have Giovanni Bernard still in this offense, who is kind of coming back in and working that pass catcher role. What we're seeing him do right now in Tampa, with what he was doing in Tampa Bay, I guess I should clarify that. But he's not necessarily taking those catches away from Joe Mixon. We know there's going to be a vertical attack. We know that. But those dump offs are always going to be there. And in DraftKings, we're a PPR style format where you're really kind of wanting that passing up, that receiving upside. Joe Mixon, he's the most expensive one by about $900 on this one at $6,800. It's the problem is there's not a lot of great running backs this week. It kind of is what it is. These past couple weeks, it's either a good running back in a bad matchup or just lackluster running backs all around. Even if you go look on the NFC side of things, I mean, you've got Elijah Mitchell going against the Los Angeles Rams run defense, and you have Cam Akers going against the 49ers, who have one of the best run fits in the NFL, which I don't think gets talked about enough. We talk about how they stop guys, but the run fit of the San Francisco 49ers, that's what shut down the Green Bay Packers and made them one-dimensional. So even Cam Akers slightly worries me. So from this one, I can just kind of lean towards Joe Mixon as the better play, as the most talented running back in this one. Although, like I said, I don't love any of the running backs, but I think a lot of lineups are probably going to have Joe Mixon in it.
Well, on the other side of the fence here for the Cincinnati Bengals Kansas City Chiefs match, I mean, going back as well, you mentioned Samaje Perine. I was disappointed last week because that one pass that literally off of his fingertips intercepted. I was like, Samaje, come on, you're killing me, man.
And yet that stat still goes against Joe Burrow.
I know. And that's the unfortunate thing about how stats are kept here in the NFL. That should be an interception on behalf of the running back or the wide receiver. They need to start making that thing. I'm on the campaign for that. Well, we'll continue on here, ladies and gentlemen. Today's episode of Pro Football Network Weekly, going through the AFC Championship Weekend DFS lineup with DraftKings. We talked about Joe Mixon. Now we're going to talk about Jerick McKinnon. $5,100 value here for the Kansas City Chiefs and for DFS players. And I tell you what, Jerick McKinnon, we talk about a guy that's just been inserted into a role with that offense. I mean, he is spectacular. Jet sweeps in the backfield as a receiver. I mean, the opportunities are endless here for the Chiefs here, which it really makes me wonder. I mean, when you look at him versus a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I feel like I'd roll into the hot hand right now with Jerick McKinnon.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. The Chiefs' backfield's a mess. It has been all year. We can kind of go back and debate how bad of a pick that was. Honestly, Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round. It probably shouldn't have been there because he can't catch the ball in when it's inside the red zone. It was a problem when he was a rookie. It's kind of carried over in the season. So we kind of get this muddy cluster that's going on right now between him. You had Darrell Williams at one point. Now you got Jerick McKinnon here as well. McKinnon has always kind of had this flashy receiving ability, and that's what we've all kind of seen. He kind of brought that into Kansas City this year. Granted, last week we kind of saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire come back, been dealing with a shoulder injury, so they kind of a little slower to bring him back, but the snaps and just the utilization of Jerick McKinnon kind of can't be overlooked. Outsnapped Clyde Edwards-Helaire 52-23, also ran 38-12 in the routes, 7-2 in the targets, 10-7 in the rushes. Granted, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was more effective. He was more efficient with those carries, 7 for 60 versus 10 for 24. For me, I kind of look at McKinnon with his last 3 games, 27 rushes, 109 yards, 14 receptions for another 162 and 2 touchdowns. For me, I'm looking at passing game utilization, kind of like we talk about with the upside of Joe Mixon. I kind of look as Jerick McKinnon being that, if you're in the 2-minute warning, if you're in the passing down situation, if you're on third down, like that's where McKinnon's going to sub in and he's going to see the majority of that game. Like this is a game where we're very much expecting, obviously, the passing games to be on full display on this one. And so I kind of like McKinnon, especially in this matchup. The Bengals this year allowed the 5th most receptions and the 6th most passing yards to running back so far this year. So in terms of matchups, I think McKinnon makes a little bit more sense. At 5,100, he's just a little bit cheaper than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but I think he probably brings a little bit more upside, given you're getting a full point per reception.
Well, let's take a look at the wide receiver unit now because it's absolutely stacked. We'll take a look at all
this
three.
This is the fun part.
You have Tyreek Hill as one. You have Jamar Chase. You have Tyler Boyd. Now, Tyreek Hill comes in at a value of $7,000. Jamar Chase coming in at a value of $6,700 and Tyler Boyd at $4,200. I mean, I'd say that this is a fantastic trio if you're hoping and praying that the game goes how we think it will.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to say about some of these guys that we don't already know. Like, we can only beat this horse so many times. I mean, Tyreek Hill last week, 11 for 150 and a touchdown. Plus, he gave the deuces to the dude who was actually ahead of him. Like, that's one of the most insulting things I think I've ever seen.
Apparently, taunting is only subjective now. I mean, that right there, I feel like the NFL, their definition, I was like, okay, they're not going to call taunting there. All right.
I was so glad, honestly, the ref swallowed the whistle. Like, that's one of those moments, like, have a little bit of context and situational awareness. Like, don't call it on that one. But I mean, like they did back when it was like the Super Bowl, when he did it to the Tyreek Hill in the end zone. So I mean, just don't do it then. I'm cool with it. Like the last time these guys played, like we've all kind of been over these stats, 6 for 40. He probably should have had more. He could have had that 65-yard touchdown right before the halftime. It's the upside of Tyreek Hill. If I'm going Patrick Mahomes, I'm stacking his top pass catchers, and we'll probably get to another one here in a little bit. Then Jamar Chase. Look, he went out there and set the rookie receiving record for a single game last time these two teams played. 11 for 262 and 3 touchdowns on 12 targets. It's kind of incredible what he does. It's everything that he specialized in at LSU. He's still using that and it's working in the NFL. Like a lot of times, like these guys come in like, okay, how is that going to translate? Because he was a very physical player off the line. Like he loved to fight a cornerback if he came up and pressed man against him. He's doing that now, but he's still winning. For a guy who took a year off, it's kind of incredible. So it's even last week, 5 for 109 against the Titans, gone over 100 yards in 4 of his last 5. The only game that he didn't was in week 18. Only played on 5 snaps. Like they already locked up the division. There was nothing else to do. The Chiefs secondary, they've gotten better. Like you talked about earlier in this episode, where Tyrann Mathieu is probably going to play in this one, come back from probably going to clear concussion protocol. So we're going to be seeing a solid Chiefs secondary. But granted, this is a Chiefs secondary that was healthy in week 17 as well. My thing is like Spagnuolo and Andy Reid, like these guys have been around long enough to where you're not going to see this massive of a game. But in terms of the Bengals players' upside, no one has more upside in the passing game than Jamar Chase. And then also in that one too, like if I'm going to look at the Chiefs guys, I got to pull on the Cincinnati one. I got to look who's going to be the secondary player on that one. I'm going to take a shot on Tyler Boyd just because I simply can't afford T. Higgins. That's kind of the big thing in this one. Came into last week with touchdowns in 4 straight games, then kind of throws up that dud. 2 for 17 yards, average 5.7 yards per target. 5.7 targets per season this year. I don't love his matchup against L'Jarius Sneed in the slot. Like he's been very solid this season. Go back to week 17. I mean, he didn't have 4 for 36. It was the touchdown that kind of saved his performance.
Yeah.
If you don't want to go Tyler Boyd, you can actually, with this lineup, you can still afford to go with someone like Byron Pringle. He's actually a little bit cheaper than Tyler Boyd. And over these last 5 games, 24 for 232 and 5 touchdowns, and been the Chiefs' top touchdown scorer. So if you want to kind of pivot off Tyler Boyd, Brian Pringle actually fits in this one, and you're just going heavy on the Chiefs at this point. But I think if you want to add in a couple more Bengals players, that I think Tyler Boyd makes a little bit of sense because you're dropping down in a price range we can actually afford.
Well, let's go to the tight end position now. You got Travis Kelce, right? I mean, I'm telling you, we're talking star-studded lineup here.
That's what we're doing.
$6,500 here. I mean, you have Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce. I mean, that is the trio that we see consistently produce when we talk about volume, impact, and the majority of the offensive production comes from these 3 players. Tell you what, show me the money.
That's all it is. I mean, if you're going to go Patrick Mahomes, like you can make a case half the time where you go Patrick Mahomes, you only go Travis Kelce, and you avoid Tyreek Hill, save the money on the receivers and pay up for the other teams. I mean, you can make a lot of case for that. just because I got greedy. I could afford both of them. So I said, screw it. I'm going to do it.
Why not?
But on this, it's Travis Kelce, 11 touchdowns this season, including the playoffs against the Steelers, 5 for 108 and a touchdown. Last week against a couple weeks ago against the Bills, 9 for 86 and a touchdown. Then also like last week, we kind of like orchestrated that drive with Patrick Mahomes. We're sure we've all seen the film where it's come out from the NFL where he was kind of telling Tyreek Hill, play inside. I can kind of block you for you a little bit. And then telling Patrick Mahomes, hey, that seam route's going to be open. That's that chemistry you get where you've played with someone for so long and you have the talent to pull that off. And it's a great matchup too. The Cincinnati Bengals have allowed the fourth highest reception total and the 5th highest yardage total so far to tight ends this year. So like there's no reason not to have Travis Kelce in the lineup at 6,500. It's the cheapest he has been all season. So for me, it's pretty much a no-brainer on this one. He was always going to be in this one, whether I went with the Bengals stack, whether I went with the Chiefs stack. Even if you're playing both lineup, playing both weekends, like Travis Kelce's kind of the lock at the tight end position. It's pretty much that way every single week whenever he's available.
Well, let's go with the flex player. Now, obviously, I think a lot of people will be putting Debo as a flex in that, but we're focusing here on the AFC Championship game. You have CJ Uzomah at $3,400. Now, Uzomah, I felt like at the very beginning of the season had such an impact in the offensive game plan. We've started to see that production dip just a tiny bit, but when you do go to him and you design these chip releases to the flats or these sit routes where you get him across the field, he does damage. He picks up first downs. I kind of like this as a flex option here.
You kind of hit on it, like his utilization in the offense. He's not just used as, okay, I'm just going to run a seam right here. Just let him go, try to find that little soft zone between the linebacker and that deep safety. Because they're going to play deep, trying to cover against Jamar Chase. So it kind of opens up some softer zones inside the defense. But it's the way he kind of gets used around the Dolphins, and they actually motion him out quite a bit because this offense still uses a lot of spread concepts, which kind of helped Joe Burrow transition in the NFL with an offense that we was very familiar with. So you kind of see that's why you've seen CJ Uzomah kind of get moved around more and more. Last week, 7 receptions on 8 targets for 71 yards. Against the Chiefs, didn't have a great game, 4 for 32, but that's kind of what happens with tight ends. Like they're not always the most consistent players unless you're paying up for a Travis Kelce, and you're getting that type of production. In the 2 playoffs games though so far this season, 13 receptions, 135 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. So I'm kind of looking at the utilization. Like there's not a lot of options. Like I was out of money here. Let's be honest. So I kind of got to do what I got to do on this one. So for me, CJ Uzomah, like he kind of fits that negative game script. I kind of went into this with the Cincinnati Bengals. And so with him fitting in there, given the way he gets used in this offense, I think the targets are there. Maybe some sneaky touchdown upside if they get in close. Like they're probably going to have a hard time punching in at times. So I think CJ Uzomah for a flex play. And when you're in the playoffs and you're doing like a single game slate, you can kind of break a few of the rules, and running double tight ends is kind of one of those. I did it a couple weeks ago when I ran with Dallas Goedert in a double stack at tight end. I think CJ Uzomah, this one kind of makes a little bit of sense too.
And I remember that lineup. Dallas Goedert actually performed really well, and that helped out in a big time.
Yeah, worked out really well on that one.
Kind of a wild card factor here.
And he could have had a way better game too, by the way, if it wasn't for all those drops and missed passes.
And interceptions and missed opportunities to have an offense on the field there by Jalen Hurts. Unfortunately, a first-round exit for the Eagles, but kind of a wild card here for defense special teams. You got the 49ers. Their special teams unit has come up clutch. You talk about Robbie Gould. You talk about them punt blocking, returning touchdowns back, but you also talk about that defense. We've talked about DeMeco Ryans, the amazing job that he has done so far this season. What they were able to do last week against the run game with A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. I mean, obviously, A.J. Dillon leaving with an injury definitely impacts your ability to run the game. However, they focus on really just taking away the run, and that's why Aaron Jones had over 100 yards receiving. So going with the 49ers defense, I think probably is going to be the smartest play of the week here out of both matchups here. I like the 49ers in that regard.
It's like we kind of talk about this. We've been basing this all off of a AFC game, but the problem is I don't really want to go for any one of these defenses. The Chiefs and the Bengals, we're expecting them to kind of give up points. You can afford in this one, if you're only treating this as a single game slate, this will still allow you to afford the Cincinnati Bengals at 2,600. But for me, I'm paying an additional $2 to get the to get the San Francisco 49ers. I think their defense probably is one of the obviously most elite ones right now left in the NFL. They're an extremely balanced defense as well. They're number 2 in run defense DVOA, number 7 overall. They struggle a little bit against the pass. And you're going up against a Rams defense a Rams offense who like to play like they're playing out of a Madden playbook, just running vertical routes to Cooper Kupp. And it somehow works with Matthew Stafford under center. So it's a little risky at times, but I think in terms of consistency, I love that play. I can't afford the Los Angeles Rams, who we know, like, okay, if you stop Jimmy Garoppolo, they're probably not going to do very much. Last week, what was it, 131 yards, which was the second time in his career He had thrown for 131 yards in a playoff win. I believe he's one of 18 quarterbacks to win a divisional round game throwing less than 150 yards, and he's actually done it twice. So he does the best when he does the least. I think he's also 3-0 in games where he hasn't thrown a touchdown. So like I said, if you want to go with the Rams, you absolutely can. You can try and probably change it around a little bit, try to slide him in there. I normally just don't pay up on a defense. So if I'm not going to do that, give me the 49ers in this one over someone like the Chiefs or the Bengals, who I'm expecting to give up points and yards in bunches.
I love it, ladies and gentlemen. Look, this is Tommy Garrett's AFC Championship DFS lineup with DraftKings, a $50,000 limit. Let me tell you how you can have a great lineup that Tommy just talked about with $100 remaining. That is Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, $7,400. Joe Mixon at tailback, $6,800. Jerick McKinnon at $5,100. And then your 3 wide receiver slate, which is fantastic. Tyreek Hill for $7,000. You have Jamar Chase for $6,700. And then you have Tyler Boyd for $4,200. Then you get to the tight end, Travis Kelce. Unbelievable lineup right here. $6,500. Flex player CJ Uzomah of the Bengals at $3,400. And then a little bit of a wild card, a little bit of sprinkle of the salt inside the mix there. You have the defense for the 49ers, $2,800. And with that lineup, you have $100 remaining, ladies and gentlemen. That is efficiency, and that right there, I feel like, is the best value if you want to win here on AFC, NFC Championship weekend. Tommy Garrett, my man, always appreciate your insight. As always, you can check out Tommy's work at ProFootballNetwork.com. Check out all the fantasy content from the DFS standpoint. Not to mention, you have some really cool things coming up here in the offseason as we take a look at some NFL draft players that could be going to new teams, fantasy impact, player profiles. You get all that. Tommy Garrett, the fantasy team at ProFootballNetwork.com. Tommy, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me on as always, bud.